Okay, Sarah's just arrived. Good. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us, everybody. This is our agenda for the day, and I will assume the chair for now, and then I'll go through the agenda. We are very lucky to have got Rob Schlegel to join us today. He did it at very short notice. We didn't have a speaker for today. Well, I tried to arrange somebody, but it didn't work out. And so I reached out to Rob, and we are very lucky to have him as a special guest, just to say hello and kind of give us a bit of encouragement. Then I'll talk a little bit about the whole concept of this idea, just to remind everybody of why we're gathering. Then I will report to you about an interim steering committee meeting that we held prior to this meeting, and proposed a couple of ideas. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you to give your opinion about a couple of items. And all the way through, I've left some time for discussion. So those that have just joined us, please introduce yourself in the chat, please. I see Stefan's just joined us. I'm gonna just wait for him to join properly. Okay, you're in. All right, so please introduce yourself on the chat. We are 23 people so far. Okay, so I'm going to move on, and this is very relaxed. If you want to interrupt at any juncture, please go ahead, unmute yourself. I might not be able to see who's wanting to talk. Okay, so the first thing I need to say is that I unilaterally appointed an interim steering committee, and the interim steering committee is a group of selected people by virtue of what they are doing and engagements we've had, but also people out of the Apex project, which is an NRF funded project, which Willem Landman is the PI of at UP, and Mkanyiso, Hector, it was Joel, but he's no longer there, Jen Fitchett, and myself are partners in that project. And one of the things we agreed to do in that project was to set up what we called at the time a consortium around extreme events. And this is it, really, this idea of developing a research alliance. And so that's our interim group of people. And I'll explain what we propose by the term interim when I get there, but later on. I'm just admitting people as they appear. And so we've consulted just once, which was I think last week or the week before, and had to pick a date for this meeting, which obviously didn't suit everybody, but we kind of just decided that we'd had to proceed. And so not all of the steering committee people are here. I think Charlotte is here. Charlotte, maybe you want to just say hello, and Willem is here, and Hector is here, and Sarah is here. Maybe you could just show your faces quickly and say hi. Can you? Charlotte. Going. Katlego had to apologize. Willem?
Hi, I'm here.
Good. That's Willem. Kaniso, are you here? I don't think you're here. Hector is here.
Hector is here.
Yep. And Sarah is here.
Hello.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, good. All right. So that's the interim steering committee as it stands for now. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you. Well, I'm not going to introduce you because I don't know him. He very kindly agreed today to
Neville, you're breaking up.
Oh, am I?
Neville, you've
sorry.
got a very shoddy lineup.
Oh dear. There's nothing I can do, I don't think. AJ, I'm going to ask you to please take the floor and introduce Rob.
Okay, thank you, Neville. Can everyone hear me? My line on the side broke up a little bit just now when Neville was speaking.
I can
Neville,
hear
can
you.
you hear me clearly?
I can hear you. And can you just tell us who you are?
Okay, excellent. Okay, I'm AJ Smith. I'm based at the University of the Western Cape, where I have been for about 10 years now. And over the last, I don't know, 7 or so years, we've been working on marine heat waves and so on. And we run together with Neville a program called ECERA, which is about extreme events in the Benguela upwelling system. But let me introduce Rob first. Rob was a PhD student in my lab many years ago, several years ago. And he was, in fact, one of the people who initially translated together with me the Python package that Eric Oliver and Alistair Hobday developed to calculate and detect and quantify marine heat waves into an R package, which for those of you who don't know, many of the people who are more of a biological or ecological bent tend to use R rather than Python. So this package, marine heat wave or heat wave R, has become fairly widely used within the ecological and biological communities, looking at extreme temperature events within the ocean. And more recently, I noticed that many papers have also started to use it to quantify atmospheric extreme temperatures and so on. So Rob has been working on many different issues around extreme heat, mostly in the ocean, but he has a fairly broad knowledge about it in general. Currently, he's based in France at where are you, Rob? Sorry, I don't have it with me at the moment, but you can introduce yourself just now. But he has been working over the last 7 or so years on marine heat waves. He has he's collaborated with Alistair Hobday, with Eric Oliver, Thomas Wernberg, and all the very important people in the marine heatwave community. So that's where you are from, Rob. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Super. Thank you very much for that intro, AJ. And I'm very happy to be here with everyone today. Thank you for the privilege to be able to speak with you about extreme events. I try to focus a bit more or less on marine heat, even though that's my specialty. But I did put together a quick presentation, which I'll just go through here. I won't take up 20 minutes like it says in the schedule. I'll be a bit more rapid than that. I like to start off with this title. I sort of thought of it sounds very positive. It is not. And I'll get into that later on near the end of the talk. So one of the things in the brief I was given was that this really is, you want to be looking at extreme events generally. And there's a lot of reasons why we do that. I have a little tweet that I'd like to start this sort of talks off with to sort of set the stage that I'll read for dramatic effect. And that is that we thought we had defeated the natural world because we defeated the animals and plants. But it turned out that they were only our fellow travelers struggling to survive. The real natural world is dust and fire and flood and hard radiation. It never sleeps and it always hungers. And to add a bit of climate change to it, it's worse. So very briefly, I threw this together. I'm currently in the process of moving into a new apartment. Like, I'm just surrounded by boxes. I managed to find my laptop, but I have a much more extensive list of people that I can give contacts for if there are specific types of extreme events that this committee wants to be looking into. I've been at this sort of the group that does marine heat waves pretty close to its inception, not quite exactly, but pretty close. I've been involved in this since about 2015. So I know, if not personally, by name, most of the key players, as AJ mentioned. So if there is something specific that someone wants to ask about, please feel free to email me and I can give you, point you in the right direction. But I'll talk more about what I specialize in to set the stage for today, and that is marine heat waves. There are, of course, many types of important extreme events, but one that's in the press a lot, especially here in the Mediterranean, is marine heat waves. And when we talk about those, we tend to use a definition created by Alistair Hobday and a group of other mostly Australian people or people living in Australia in 2016. And then in 2018, they came back with another definition of the categories for these events. And so very briefly, a marine heat wave is any time when the ocean temperature is above the 90th percentile. So the temperature is in the top 10% of anything ever recorded for at least 5 or more days. This uses a fixed baseline, which is an important point that I'll circle around back to right at the end of the talk. And this is similar to what the IPCC uses. So this is pretty well agreed upon international stuff, but there is some contention about it. So there are a few large international groups. There's a few groups in Europe that are looking into this stuff. But the sort of group that includes more people in South Africa, Australia, and Canada, basically all the Anglophonic countries of the world, is this website, marineheatwaves.org, which I would recommend giving a look if anyone's interested. It could provide a template perhaps for what you're thinking about putting together in South Africa. For me on my end, this is what AJ just mentioned. We work on the detection of events and thinking about what goes into that. It's mostly statistics. If anyone's interested, there's a QR code you can snap with your cell phone to go to the website for that software. It's pretty well documented. We're pretty happy with it, but we are currently in the process of thinking about how to improve it even more. So space to be watched. For me, I use machine learning to get a whole bunch of different types of data to see what it is that might be driving extreme events. And so we're seeing there on the right-hand side, air temperature and mean sea level pressure during extreme events around Canada. It's a pretty interesting little bit of work where you could actually pull out when there were certain northeaster storms coming through without the machine having any foreknowledge of what the atmosphere should look like there. And there are all sorts of other teams doing all sorts of different ways of investigating extreme events, their drivers in the ocean, in the atmosphere. And the space now is becoming pretty well saturated, in my opinion. There is still new work to be done, but there's papers every week now coming out about some new regional study in some part of the world that uses an already established methodology for detecting what was the physical force of these events at this time for whatever reason. The literature on marine heat waves now is enormous in all extreme events. I also work on implementing operational tools for tracking marine heat waves. If anyone wants to check that out, there's a website that we put together for that. It updates itself daily. It has a life of its own now. And you can go back in time 30 years to see where in the ocean there were extreme events. There is another tool made by Sarah Perkins Kirkpatrick, which I can't remember what it's called, but you can search for it on Google. And that does atmospheric heat waves, but I think it's just for Australia. I don't think anyone has developed an operational tool for atmospheric events globally, to my knowledge. The people at NOAA, the American Bureau of Atmosphere and Ocean, they have a decent tool they put together as well, which has climate predictions or projections. And it's pretty nice. It's well done. It's a huge project supported by US federal money. So this probably isn't necessary to tell this group of people, but why should we care, right? Well, when we talk about marine heat waves, they are increasing in duration and intensity almost globally. There are a couple spots where it's a little funny, like south of Greenland, for example, or in the Pacific, which is pretty much just driven by the El Nino climate signal. But I thought it would be useful just to mention, sort of as motivation for why we should really be doing something about this, a few really big, well-known events. And this also sort of tells us the history of extreme events in the ocean in the modern era, being satellite record. So we have the first big one that really ever caught people's attention, and that was in the Mediterranean in 2003. This wiped out about 80% of all the Gorgonian fans in the area, which is the largest vertical structure ecosystem engineer. Arguably seagrass is more so, but it's not as diverse. And I mean, since the writing of this, there wasn't even the last 5 years in the Med have been greater than this event, which was set all sorts of records. We recently wrote a paper, another Garabo et al. 2022, I think it was published, where they show all the mass mortality events for the last 5 years and how they've just become standard. Every year there's mass mortality in the Mediterranean, and they just broke all the recent records this year, 2022. It was nuts. It was like 120-day long marine heat wave. It's just completely off the charts. Western Australia, though, was when people really got together and decided, all right, we need to come up with some sort of implementation. And very recently, Sarah Perkins Kirkpatrick had put together a pretty well accepted definition for the atmosphere. And so this group of scientists in 2015 decided that, okay, let's adapt it to work more or less for the ocean. And that's that 5 days or longer at the 90th percentile. And so this Western Australia event was pretty intense. It is a little Easter egg here. That is the Western Australia event. When you take away the temperature trend line and you add the categories, that shape for the heat wave, our logo, that is actually that 2011 Western Australia event. It wiped out hundreds of kilometers of kelp forests, which a decade later have not come back. They have shifted over to sort of a turf reef coral sort of thing, that it's a completely different ecosystem. Another curious event was in 2012, which is noteworthy because they're on the Northwest Atlantic. It's lobsters are the main fishery, and they're a bit unique in the fisheries of the world, in which the governments of Canada and the United States just sort of told the lobstermen, which is a fantastic name for an industry. It's the real word for it, lobstermen, which sounds more to me like they're just big lobster people. They actually started just shooting at each other because the center of the fishery shifted across the international border there. And you had people, American lobstermen, going into Canadian lobsterman territory, and they go armed, and it's worth money, and it caused actual conflict. And this is completely temperature driven, and this is only getting worse. And I'll finish up with the blob, which is perhaps the most famous marine heat wave now. It was from 2014 to 2016, and it was just one physical force after another. This killed whales. This was basically every single trophic level of the ecosystem of the Northeast Pacific Ocean. We're not talking coastal, we're talking open ocean. It starved out whales because it completely remixed the whole bottom of the trophic system. All of the plankton just poof. It was crazy. And now it happens almost every year. It's the new normal. So what does this look like for the ocean? This is a figure, I forgot to cite it, sorry, from I think Eric Oliver 2019 et al. And this shows us in two simple panels. On the left and the right, we have RCP 4.5, which is the projection if we shift to carbon neutral industry nowish, and 8.5, which is if we just sort of carry on as we're carrying on. The x-axis is years, so from 1850 to 2100. I think this is CMIP 5 data. And on the left, we have the global mean days per year of marine heat waves, with the dashed line showing 365 days. So that dashed line then is if the ocean is experiencing a marine heat wave nonstop all year long. And so we're sort of near the inflection point there. We're in about halfway up that inflection point. And this paper was written several years ago, but we are on track to match or exceed what we are seeing in this figure. The projections have been true so far. The point of this to show is that in the global ocean, if we transition now, then parts of the global ocean will not be experiencing 365-day marine heat waves all year long starting in about 2050. If we don't transition, then basically the entire surface of the ocean will be experiencing a constant marine heat wave based on the satellite record of about 1980 to 2010 is the baseline for that. But the really important point to note from this is that those colors mean something. And very roughly speaking, this is very rough, this is not quantified. The really light yellow parts, those are kind of okay. That doesn't really destroy ecosystems. The orange bits, those are worrying. Anything at its thermal limit, that will wipe them out. Red will reshuffle an ecosystem regardless of how thermally resistant the species are. And the black color replaces ecosystems. It shifts them to something else. The black color is what destroyed the west coast of Australia, what removed all the kelp forests. And so just note that we are on track by 2100 that, let's say 3/4, 2/3 of the global ocean will be reshuffled, that those ecosystems will change. That is completely certain, right? That's what it is. And this is why this is important in the numbers. To not neglect the atmosphere. I just saw this tweet yesterday. This is risk percentage. So we have on the x-axis, we have years. On the y-axis, we have percent risk. And what that is it's a percent risk of the same anomalously warm summer that we had in the Pacific Northwest just last year, where it got so warm that there was a firestorm that wiped out a small city in Canada. Right? Canada is a pretty wealthy country, but when the atmosphere gets so hot that they cannot stop a firestorm from destroying a whole city, that's not great. And so that risk that we're seeing there is of that happening again. So by 2050, now we're already seeing perhaps a 40% chance, meaning there's almost a 1 in 3 that that's going to happen every single year. And then we go to 2100 and it becomes almost a certainty that you'll be having these events. I mean, what do you do with that, right? In a rich country. So I mentioned one point of contention though, and that is that as dire as all of this sounds, it is based on a fixed historic baseline, right? Which we're to the point now where we can't even really measure extreme events with a fixed baseline anymore. Because what does it mean if the future of the ocean is always in an extreme event? Because that's not an event anymore. It doesn't have a start and finish. So there's discussion now about we can't even use a fixed baseline in these sort of extreme event detections because it's falling apart. So, with that, I'll leave you with another uplifting comic just to point out that, we've done this. This isn't normal. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Rob. Rob, I hope you can stay for the rest of the talk. I just wanted to make a few remarks about what you said. It was interesting that you said the space has become saturated. I'm assuming you're referring in particular to the marine heat wave world, but in general, extreme events is becoming a more and more popular focus of research. And that's one of the reasons we're organizing this group, is to try and organize ourselves around that. And to really ask what are the questions. That's one of the things we need to sort out. So I'll get to later. And then I wanted to point out that just in terms of sea surface temperatures, you'll probably all be familiar with the fact that in the last week, we made news headlines on all the big news sites that sea surface temperatures are this season are in unprecedented ranges. So it's quite ubiquitous. It's in large sects of the ocean, and so this is what you were showing seems to be manifesting actually. And then I also wanted to just make a point about the change of state, and I think that's critical. I mean, we are familiar with these. I am familiar with the stuff that's written in the marine environment, and if anyone's ever heard me give a talk, I always cite Harris's paper from Australia, which talks about the pulses and presses. and there's 4 case studies of changing state in Australian marine ecosystems or coastal ecosystems. But of course, this matters for climate zones, it matters for agriculture, and in all other systems other than marine ones. I think that's critically important. And then finally, I need to hear you say, well done, South Africa, for organizing this research consortium, and it's very important that you do it. I want to put words in your mouth. I'm kidding. So thank you very much. I'm not sure if there is quickly any other comments or points that anyone else wants to make about Rob's presentation. I'll give you a moment. Anybody?
Can I just say something? It's, I think the one of the things that needs to be taken into account is that, Rob's view on extreme events, and I think the same kind of detecting approach can apply to any other kind of geophysical time series within which you can find extremes like winds and waves and so on, sea level and that kind of thing. But this particular definition is entirely applied onto impacts, irrespective of whether they have on events, irrespective of whether they actually result in impacts. So the other side of the coin is, of course, also to be able to detect when impacts are actually taking place in the ecological systems or in social systems or in ecological or in economic systems and so on. And there, I think a new series or a novel series of metrics might be necessary. It's not always going to be possible to apply this statistical approach onto the onto systems where we're trying to look at impacts of extreme events. So both of these two things need to be considered side by side.
Thank you, AJ. I think that's an important point to reiterate, is that what might be an extreme event to a data statistician may not be an extreme event in an operational sense. Values or metrics lower than the statistical one, or even higher, as the case may be, might matter more. That's very much part of what we're talking about. Okay, so Rob, thanks so much for stepping in. I think I only contacted Rob at 10 o'clock this morning, about 2 hours ago. So it was very kind of you to agree to say something to us. And we're going to move on to the sort of business end of this meeting. And again, I'm assuming that if you have and want to say something, please just unmute and interject, because I can't see while I'm looking at these slides. So the next item on the agenda is just to repeat the idea behind this Extreme Climate Event Research Alliance idea, and then to hold some discussion on it. And I've got 2 slides here. One is to reiterate the kind of thinking that went into why we need to do this, and then something about the scope of what we have envisaged. I've got 2 figures up here. The first figure is something you'll be very familiar with. It's on the x-axis, the various time scales of operations. Now I forget now which is the time scale one, and the different approaches. And basically, what's key here is on the graph is a time scale from minutes to decades and centuries, and it sort of divides the idea of thinking about climate in operational, tactical, and strategic terms. And the point here being that as seasonality changes and extreme events change, so the time scales of these events and the impacts of these changes start to integrate across these time scales. They no longer can be thought of as separate approaches. And so we do need to think about weather, about seasons, and about climate change over longer time periods, and what's happening to those seasons, and what's the weather going to be like at climate change scales. So that was to remind me to say that. And the other thing on the left-hand side is just the National Framework for Climate Services concept, which is really what prompted us to have 2 sessions we had at the January Global Change Workshop, one on extreme events and one on climate and health. And that is that this framework, which is being adopted in South Africa now, really does try to think of climate services in an end-to-end way. And I know that there are some people who don't agree with that, even that conceptualization even, but be that as it may, in determining what are the observations and not just what, but where and when those observations are taking place, how we use the observations and other information to answer research questions which are important, how we distribute that information, and how we engage with users in a two-way relationship, which ultimately filters right back to the kinds of observations and research that we should be making. And so, given the importance of extreme events, we felt it was necessary to kind of organize the community accordingly. So I'll just quickly iterate the ideas behind this. The critical element, even today, there was a warning about extreme flooding or extreme weather in KZN again, which was issued. So it's becoming a very important hook for climate consciousness. People are starting to understand climate because it's real for them. And extreme events happen at the time and space scales that really matter to people, that it's something that they can see and feel. And it affects all kinds of social systems and economic systems on all time scales, as we've discussed already. The problem we have is that there isn't a coordinated strategy for prioritizing the research required to enable a suitable response, an appropriate response to extreme events. Of course, there are systems in place, and today's example of the warning in KZN is one of those. They do exist, but there are other questions which we need to get to, which we need to decide on which are our priorities. And so, as a consequence, there's a fairly fragmented and duplicated effort, and I would argue a lack of awareness of who exactly is doing what. And in a country like South Africa, where we have scarce skills and low resources available, it's really important that we try and avoid that fragmentation and duplication where possible. Then, of course, there are potential gaps. Without such a coordinated strategy, there are potential gaps, both in the research and the research outputs. And then finally, research is driven by various motives. Obviously, there are events such as the KZN floods of last year, which tend to be the flavor of the season, and that was borne out by the fact that at our session in January, almost all of the publications were about the KZN. I mean, the presentations were about the KZN floods, and people seem to have forgotten about, you know, the massive wildfires, the persistent drought in the Eastern Cape and in the Northwest, the floods in KwaZulu, in Limpopo, the day zero drought, etc., etc. Many people in this meeting have done work on all of those problems, but we do need to we argue, coordinate better. So what is it that we want to do with scope? What is the scope of this research alliance? Well, this is what we're proposing. It's really to develop a consciousness of who is doing what in the form of an inventory of exactly who is doing what and how the research is devised and how it's driven, etc., etc. Then to share knowledge and expertise on particular applications or problems or on research questions in general. Very importantly, and although this was already covered both by what AJ said and what Rob said, is to define very clearly what we mean and to define and constrain the discussions of ECEs. And I want to emphasize here that we are talking about a research alliance, although obviously along this value chain, and again, I know that's a pejorative term to some, we talk about a value chain from knowledge to tools to solutions to beneficiaries and back again in a potential loop. We still need to decide what is the the focus of what we want to do. And I emphasize that this is a research alliance, albeit the research, as already described, cannot be independent of the users and the applications. But certainly here, our role is to focus on what the research should be prioritizing and should be doing. And so the idea then is to develop a national scale coordinated research strategy. I wrote there for whom. This is not an exclusive research strategy. It doesn't replace anything, and it doesn't hold the center necessarily. It's something for us all to use as a guideline to coordinate what we're doing and to ensure that everything we need to have covered is covered. And how it's used is really dependent on those that subscribe to it. So it's not the idea of becoming dictatorial. And then the idea is to act as a clearinghouse for collaboration, as a collaboration portal. So a clearinghouse and a collaboration portal. So what funding opportunities are there, and how do people need to collaborate? What opportunities are there for collaboration? To plan and present to relevant agencies for implementation, if it develops that far, and then possibly even to develop tools, some of which we've already heard about, that some we may not have been aware of, to develop tools and training opportunities for our community. So just to reiterate, I'm going to stop talking now. So we're talking about the problem, why we think it's necessary, and now we're talking about the scope of what we envisage it could do. And so now I've set some time aside to take any discussion that anybody might have. And so I'm going to stop sharing for a bit and ask if there are any comments at this stage. And please feel free and get the Jeff, I see your note, thank you. Please feel free to comment on what I've said and potentially what others before me have said so far. If you like the idea of what we're doing, you can say that too. That'll be helpful for the record. But we are recording this, and so if you have concerns or ideas, I'm going to present some specific ideas in a minute, but let's see what there is from the floor. So I see no hands while I've been talking. Somebody must have something to say. There are 25 of us in the meeting. I'm going to wait and see.
Okay, I have something to say. I'm glad that this is happening. I just would like to see that there's a continued strong emphasis on operations. This is something that myself and the people like Weather Service would be particularly interested in. Operational work, not necessarily research work, but something that leads to that other end of the spectrum that you've referred to before.
Thank you, Willem. If you want to elaborate, you can, but otherwise, I'll give you an example and you can tell me if you think it's a good one, but go ahead, Willem.
Yes, for example, we are issuing forecasts on various timescales from weather through to seasonal. And this talk that we've just listened to about the heat waves in the ocean is something that we have kind of inadvertently done, is busy doing, to be honest. For example, the work that we are doing with the Weather Service, where we show El Nino, and we show our forecast capability on seasonal timescales over areas outside of the tropical Pacific Ocean. And so that could already be something that can be incorporated into something that can lead to operational statements as part of this whole idea of climate services.
Okay, I'm going to ask others if they want to comment, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds to develop the courage to say something while I give you an example, Willem, of what Willem is talking about, and that's the operational side of things and the relationship between the research and the operational side. So I feel like, and this is again open for discussion, our role, at least from my perspective, is to direct the research in such a way that it has a landing place and that it is used operationally. Obviously, that is really the purpose of this. But it's really to organize the research component of that value chain. But how it can be applied, I'm going to use an example from climate and health, which Willem and I, and I think some others in this room have been involved in before. and that is to develop, let's say, some modeling tools which are based on seasonal forecasts for application in malaria management. So currently, as an example, we issue malaria forecasts, which are then absorbed by the Tsanin Malaria Institute, and they develop spraying protocols in various districts based on those predictions. And that is a real example of an operational application at the seasonal scale. Operations at different scales will also matter. And of course, retrospective analyses for understanding the attribution questions are also important. So let's see if there's anybody else who would like to make a point here about, again, the problem we've got and the scope of what we envisage. Anybody else? See, no one's putting up their hand, which I take it to mean everybody's in support of what was presented. And if no one has a point, then I'm going to proceed. Okay. Oh, Charlotte says thumbs up. Okay. Thank you, Charlotte. All right. I'm going to go back to the presentation where I was. And again, I'm going to ask you to shout out if you want to say something. I just can't see. That's what I want to do. Okay, good. So, all right. So I've spoken to you already about the scope and the purpose of what we want to do. So the steering committee meeting met, this interim steering committee meeting met last week or the week before, and we decided to proceed with this event, and we discussed the idea of proposing a couple of items to this meeting. And the first thing I just want to mention is we spoke about the governance and what we believe that this could become. At the moment, it needs a light touch. We don't want to overburden it with any process that might encumber us. And so the idea is to elect a committee, institute some activities, and if it grows strong enough or big enough and there's more demand on it as an organization, and if it starts to look at things like funding or managing funding or seeking its own funding, then it will need much more of a governance structure. But at the moment, we're going to work with the steering committee. What's important is that we obviously sit in the space between research and applications. And there are a number of organizations such as SASAS, which is the Atmospheric Science Association, and then various application or domain-specific organizations. We're somewhere in between the two of those. I've in this scheme that I spoke about earlier, I think we mostly focused on the knowledge and tools area. Again, not independent of, but that's where our kind of center of gravity lies. And so I think right now, what we need is a steering committee, and we are proposing that steering committee be endorsed by this meeting, which I've got a poll for at the end, and that we let that steering committee serve until we get to a point where we can meet formally, and that is one of the proposals for the idea. And then I want to say that it's very important that we are inclusive and representative. And so we did this by having the meeting which was an open meeting in January, decided to proceed with this idea, which is manifested in today's meeting. But we don't want to stop recruiting people that are interested in this. And so we ask that, we ensure that there is good inclusivity and representativity, and that we don't become exclusive, and that we do encourage as many people who are able to contribute and willing to contribute to do this. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for a moment and just see if there are any comments. Rakely, you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Hi, Neville. Hi, Neville, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. So as you said, well done, South Africa, for organizing this. It's a much needed initiative, as I said in the chat, just to get some questions in as to how this will proceed in terms of coordination. Is the NRF going to be the central body that organizes the coordination? Is there to coordinate the research itself? There's multiple. It's actually something that should have been done yesterday, given the impacts that we have already seen on the ground, and it seems to be a delayed initiative, although I don't want to comment negatively too much on a positive initiative. Yeah, if that could be, if we could shed some light on that,
Yeah.
it would be great. You know, whether the NRF would be coordinating this, and whether ultimately, you know, when do we see disaster management services on the ground, ensuring that people's lives are being saved, that we're reducing the impacts on the ground, that kind of, you know, how fast, how rapidly can we get from a research paper to an on the ground action, community-led adaptation, you know, because it's something that we need rapidly. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. I don't have answers for you, but I'll give you an opinion, of mine. So this has all emerged out of an ECERA, which is an Earth System Science Program research project, which Willem is the PI of. And we proposed an idea of a project on extreme events. Nominally, we're looking at a couple of examples, but one of the products of that project is a research consortium, as we put it then. So that's why this has come about. And in parallel to that is the DFFE's National Framework for Climate Services being implemented by SOARS, of which Charlotte is very involved in, and other colleagues. And so I think it's premature for us to decide who should coordinate it, because I think at this stage, it's owned by nobody and owned by everybody. And hence, some of us have taken the initiative to set up this interim steering committee, which will hold the fort until such time as we are in a position to give it more substance. Of course, we will report this to the NRF and to the Department of Science and Innovation, hopefully to DFFE as well. And how it's used, how this thinking is used, whether it will result in, for example, a research call or a program, that's not our decision at this stage. So it's really a kind of a organic ground up process, this. And so where it ends up is really up to everybody in this meeting. I support your idea. It would be very nice to have it centrally coordinated by an authority, but at this stage, we're not near that stage yet. We're not at that point of development. That's my view. I'm not sure if the other comments on that. Anyone else have a comment? And please unmute and speak, because I can't see your hand. If anyone else wants to comment on Reiki's question and my answer.
Neville.
Yes, AJ.
Question from me, Neville.
Yes.
Do we know who is who in the extreme climate events area of interest within South Africa? Do we know who does what? I think maybe starting or knowing the individual people, their strengths, what they bring into the overall consortium, where they are based, everything like that, you know, just a database of everyone. I think that would be a logical place to start. I mean, I certainly don't know everyone. I think, you know, I'm very much embedded in the marine heatwave thing. So outside of that, I don't know. But I do think we need to talk to other people. I think we need to have a platform under which we can exchange ideas, collaborate, and meet frequently. Who's
Good.
who?
Thank you for that, AJ. That will be dealt with in the next point on that slide in a moment, but that's one of the key, I think, contributions that organizing ourselves will make, is precisely that. Have a quite specific, two specific ideas to address that very point, which I'll ask you just to wait for a moment before we proceed. Reiki, your hand's up again. Go ahead.
Yes, I communicated with can't remember what's his name from NRF maybe 2 years back, and he said that it was actually part of the Africa Global Hub, Future Earth's Africa Global Hub initiative.
Michael Khumalo.
No, it was the guy before Michael Khumalo.
No.
Who he was there, but he moved to some university. He moved away from NRF. But anyway, he said that NRF already had a database of researchers in the country that were doing extreme, or not extreme specifically, climate related global, people, researchers in the country that were doing global research. It was part of that global research program that was in place in around 2019, thereabouts.
So in fact, the ASAF, the South African Association of, what's ASAF stand for? Anyone? ASAF did a study on climate research, climate change research in particular, actually, on the sort of who's who and who's doing what, but not on extreme events in particular. Okay. So are the other comments? Anybody else? Going? I'm moving on. Wait, Stefan, please. Hello, Stefan. Nice to see you.
Yeah, morning. Sorry if there's a bit of background noise here. I just want to reiterate some of what's been said already. I'm doing research on climate reconstructions from trees. So I've got some really good coverage for the last 1,000 years, which obviously picks up some extreme events, which would be spectacularly worrying for any politician if they could see it or if they understood it. But what I kind of feel is that I don't fit into a network. I don't know who else is doing this kind of work, and I don't know who's interested in my results. And so, it turns out that when I look at what's forcing these radical events in the Southern African climate system, it's ocean atmosphere. It's the heat waves in the ocean. So everything that's been spoken about makes complete sense. And right now, I kind of feel that the organization is absolutely the thing that's missing. And even if there have been initiatives to try and unite scientists around this theme, I feel like an outsider. I didn't even know about the conference that you guys had earlier, where I feel I could have made a contribution. So I think that the database is a good start.
Okay. All right, good. Well, let me move on to the two ideas that the steering committee, the interim steering committee, spoke about. The one is sort of integrated. I mean, I think the idea of sending out a survey and collecting this information about who's who is doable, and I think we should do that. But I'm going to tell you what the steering committee proposed after discussing this idea a bit further, and that was to kind of develop a position paper on extreme climate events in South Africa in particular. And we spoke about this concept. Again, I as editor of one of the journals, see this word coming up quite often. It's the word typology. Here, meaning really defining and describing the words that are used commonly when talking about extreme events. Now, you've heard already from Rob and from AJ that there are very good definitions out there But you also heard AJ saying that in some cases, these definitions may not be applicable or not wholly applicable. And when we're talking about extreme event impacts, when we're talking about extreme event drivers and various other terms, they all mean something slightly different. And so the proposal is that those who are interested should help develop a review paper which defines a typology, at least borrows existing definitions and typologies which might exist already, and domesticates them for South Africa, defining a sort of value chain, so to speak, of this typology, so that we know what we mean when we say it. And of course, some of these terms are not fixable. Some of them are perpetually dynamic, but that we can also include. So we think about what do we mean and where do we see these things manifesting in South Africa. So in a sense, it's both a retrospective look, and I don't know what timescale, Stefan, but a retrospective look at what we are talking about, what events are well known that might have occurred and that have occurred more recently, to define these terms and then lay out a value chain. And on that value chain, we then use that typology to identify who is doing what work in those various stages along that gradient. That might take a bit longer than you might envisage by doing a quick survey. They're not mutually exclusive ideas, but that was the one idea. So basically, that we initiate this group by writing a document which defines precisely what we're meaning. So I'm going to ask you to comment on that idea now. If anybody's interested in this, wants to participate in it, there are two things you can do. You can say so, or you can write your name in the chat and say, I want to do it. Be part of a group of people that writes something like that. So let me stop there and see if there are any comments on this approach in particular. Are there any naysayers? Anyone think it's a bad idea? I'm getting nothing. Why am I getting nothing? Let me see. If you think it's a bad idea, you're very welcome to say so. I'm going to stop sharing and see. Anybody? I've got a comment down here. AJ said he wants to play along, so that means he likes the idea. Who else is interested in participating in helping write up a concept to conceptualize what we are talking about in extreme events and define the various terms? And we might want to workshop this a little bit online to describe what we're talking about. Nobody else? Is it just AJ? Willem is in? Good. Okay, so nobody opposes the idea, but only two people are really interested. Lutendo, thank you. Okay. Oh, sorry, you just said Stefan. Okay. Framework approach to working. I'm now losing track. Okay, good. I can't say your name. Ndi Khangu, I think is your name. Okay, so that's one activity that we are proposing to do. Malebo's interested. Okay, good. All right. Miriam supports. Hello, Miriam. In a long time. Okay, good. So that's the idea. So we produce a document, and potentially this very same group of people can help us organize a survey. She supports the survey idea. So maybe we can do both. And then once we've done that survey, we can also invite people to participate. Okay, good. I'm going back to the presentation since I see no other comments. But no, let me share my screen. Okay, good. So there was a second idea. And the second idea is a conference. And why a conference? I've got a document which I'm going to open now. I thought I'd hyperlink this to the document. Did I? Yes, I did. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. Okay. So the idea of a conference, and I'm going to share, I think I did share with everybody the note. Oh my gosh. Okay, let me find it another way. I'm sorry about that. But the link doesn't occur unless it's like logged in and I don't have permission and so on and so forth. Here it is. Okay. So I'm going to make it a bit bigger and I'm going to reshare my screen. Just bear with me. Okay. So the idea here is to hold a symposium sometime this year. And the symposium does a couple of things. It basically creates the space where, oops, that's too small, right? It creates a space where everybody who is playing a role can attend. And at that point, we can effectively launch the Research Alliance officially. We can get government to participate. We can make the connections we need to make across the value chain, and we can focus ourselves on this typology, which hopefully we'll have prepared beforehand. So the purpose then is to bring together all researchers in this field to present and workshop their research projects and programs, and to locate themselves on this defined, I'm using the term value chain, on research for extreme climate event services and products. And the aim is to develop a clear understanding of the main drivers of research efforts, the drivers of the research efforts, and to identify strategic gaps, share learning, foster collaborations amongst researchers in the field. The other aim is to consult with the community on how best to organize our research alliance in this research community. So there we can finalize governance processes, vote on and elect a steering committee and a process for electing the committee going forward. And this meeting will also be used to launch this event. And the outcomes that we envisage are a potential special issue of the South African Journal of Science, for example, on all of this, a mapping of all of this work that's currently underway, to mandate and formally constitute this organization, a plan of action going forward, and potentially a planning document for publication. So that's really what we're talking about. This is the idea. We'll do it an in-person meeting with some hybrid events, themed sessions potentially for presentation on scientific reports, a research mapping workshop as part of it, facilitated discussions, and an election and mandate. We'll have a document which we can discuss for officially organizing this research alliance. We're proposing that it should happen sometime in November for 3 days. And yeah, so here I am presenting this to you, and we need to take this to our particular officials if it's supported here to get buy-in, including Reiki, the National Disaster Risk Management Center, who, by the way, were invited to come to this meeting as well. So that's, if it's agreed, we will get the interim committee to set up a conference committee and take it forward from there. So that's the idea. I'm going to stop sharing that. I see there is a comment. Let me see what the comment is. Oh, you have to leave, Rob. Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's the idea for the conference. I want to just see if there are any comments on the conference idea. Suggest having surveys first. Indeed, I think that's a good idea, Rebecca. Thank you. It wasn't Rebecca, that was somebody else. Rebecca said support idea. That was Miriam. Thank you, Miriam. There are lots of conferences that time of year. Yes, I think it might be, and we have to look for that. For example, we might want to do it in parallel with SASAS, for example, or something else like that. We'll have to see when would be a good time. We'll have to check it out carefully. But my question really is, does anyone like the idea or dislike the idea or have cautions about the idea? Want to host the idea? Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, if you want to host it, you are welcome to put up your hand and say you can host it at your institution. That would be welcome. Any other comments on this? Going. Okay, so now that's pretty much the end of the agenda for this meeting. But I have got two polls. The first poll is to get a vote of the people here on the idea of a conference. I've never done this before, so I'm doing it for the first time. So now I'm going to ask you all to vote. Okay, so here's the poll. Launch the poll. Tell me if it's working. Okay, so now you have to vote in favor of the conference in 2023. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Wow. AJ is offering to host. Thank you, AJ. And there was one opposing vote. The person who opposes it is very welcome to say why they are opposed to it, but
because I hit the wrong button.
Oh. Okay, you're the host,
I support
Rebecca.
it. I'm just slow.
You're the host. I'm joking. Okay, so AJ is offering to host. When you say I'm offering to host, you're saying UWC, right? Is what I think you mean, right?
Yeah, UWC. I think we can put some other resources into it as well.
Okay.
And
Cool.
make a
So
plan.
everybody voted. Thank you for that. Very good. Okay, I'll share the results. So you can see the results. Okay, good. So thank you for that. So that's good. So that's a good decision. I think so the next decision we have to make, which I'd like to get formally mandated, is just to get a vote on the interim steering committee that we have. If AJ is going to host this at UWC, I would like to elect him onto the steering committee, but let's get to that just now. I just want to remind you who currently is on our steering committee. I would ask that you give them a formal vote of approval so that at least this group of people can be mandated to work on these ideas and include those that have volunteered to participate in those activities until such time as the conference happens, at which we will formally do the elections, so we can have a proper process. But this is just an interim committee to hold the floor. Am I sharing? Can you see what the names of the people here?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So at the moment, I'm interim chair. Charlotte, Katlejo, Willem, Mkaniso, Hector, Sarah, and Mohau are our interim steering committee. And I would like to ask you, I'm going to now do my second poll. I think I'm going to do my second poll to see whether, now how do I go close that? Polls, okay. Back, I've got to go back. Now I'm going to ask you to please, if you are in favor of this interim steering committee, then please vote. You don't have to vote. But if we have a majority of people that say yes, they are happy with this particular group, then we will let that group proceed. If you're unhappy, you're welcome to vote no. But that's it so far. Okay, I think we've got a majority so far. Yeah, okay, that's cool. Thank you. All right, good. So that makes our interim committee elected, which I'm glad about, so we can at least feel like we're representing somebody. I see there are some abstentions, but that's also welcome. No problem there. I'm going to end the poll in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. So we've got a unanimous majority, although not everybody voted. So thank you for that. Okay, good. So then I'm now finally going to go to the agenda just to check that we've done everything so that we can conclude our meeting. So you've all, you heard Rob and you heard some comments on what Rob said. We spoke about the concept of this idea of developing a research alliance and where it will go to and what it will do, what the scope is, why it's necessary. And I think we've got consensus on all of that. We have some ideas just on, we spoke a little bit about the governance process, which is at this stage now going to be a very light touch until such time as we a light touch until we meet formally to launch it. And as that event, which is now going to be the symposium, we will formally elect a steering committee, and then that steering committee can let it grow as it wants to grow, as it should grow. And as demand for organization grows, so we can develop the governance systems accordingly. We have the idea of developing a document which kind of helps us define what we mean and what we're talking about along a conceptual value chain from drivers and sources and causes of extreme events right through to applications. We will do a survey in parallel with that process and then try to locate people on that value chain. And then I propose that we slightly new is we present the results of this process, these two things, the survey and the ideas, at the conference, which we agreed to host. UWC, thank you, AJ, has agreed to host it. We've now got a steering committee. We've got a number of people that have volunteered to help us develop this concept further. And then we will work towards a process of developing a more robust concept for the conference. We'll develop a call, etc., and keep everybody informed of progress along those lines. And then you've all very kindly helped us by at least supporting, mandating this interim steering committee. And I think that's everything I wanted to cover at this meeting as interim chair. I want to ask any of my steering committee members that are present if they've got anything that they would like to add at this stage. So who's still here? Sarah, Willem, Charlotte. Who else is still here from our steering committee? Anyone? Your chance to say anything? No additions from your side, thank you. Sarah, anybody else? Okay, anyone else have anything else to say at this stage? What I will do is write up some notes from this meeting. I'll make the recording available, and I will send a short report to our stakeholders in government as well about this. All right, well, that's it then. I think we're done. Final statements, final chance for anyone to say anything. Going. Okay, gone. We stopped. We've ceased. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Neville.
Thank you
Cheers.
very much. Now I have to stop recording.
Thank you.